Hey guys, how y'all doing tonight? Thanks for coming by, stopping by the CJ Real Show. Hope everybody's doing well out there today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this RFK speech. I think that was pretty amazing that he came out last night denouncing and pointing out the communism of the Communist Democrat Party, how they have basically flipped on their own supporters, on the American people, on the United States Constitution of freedom and liberty and freedom of speech and all these things. And they've also sort of just gotten rid of the process in which to elect their candidates. And we see now for the second time that they basically usurped the will of the Democrat voters and just picked Kamala Harris, because they seem to just want Kamala Harris for whatever reason. This is not democracy. And as I have stated many times over the years, that we own the government. We the people own the government. We own both of these parties. And I'm even going to bring the Republicans in on this, because both these parties have basically been convicted before in the past of crimes and wrongdoing, and I don't think either party should really be able to put forth a candidate for the President of the United States. Once your party has been found to be guilty of unscrupulous and criminal activity, then that's it. You're out. That's just it. That should be the American way right there. Alright, so let's go through some of this. I'm going to probably fast forward through some of the parts. I think it's a pretty long speech here, but we'll just get through it together. Let's see what we got.
Hello, everyone. Welcome so much for being here. I'd like to introduce everyone to bring on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I'm sorry to keep everybody waiting. 16 months ago, in April of 2023, I launched my campaign for President of the United States. I began this journey as a Democrat, the party of my father, my uncle, the party which I pledged my own allegiance to long before I was old enough to vote. I attended my first Democratic convention at the age of 6 in 1960.
Sorry about the video quality, guys. Basically reduced it down in size so it wouldn't take up a lot of room and just take up a lot of resources, but we can hear him and we know what the guy looks like, so I think this will be fine.
And back then, the Democrats were the champions of the Constitution, of civil rights. The Democrats stood against authoritarianism.
Now, I don't think the Democrats have ever been the party of civil rights. I don't believe that for a minute. I don't believe they've ever been the party of the Constitution as it was written. That's why we are where we are. Both these parties have tried to add or deduct from the United States Constitution as it was written, and that's why we're in the position that we're in today.
Against censorship, against colonialism, imperialism, and unjust wars. We were the party of labor, of the working class. The Democrats were the party of government transparency and the champion of the environment. Our party was the bulwark against big money interests and corporate power. True to its name, it was the party of democracy. As you know, I left that party in October because it had departed so dramatically from the core values that I grew up with.
Well, both parties have long ago became in bed and emboldened and attached to both political parties. To act like there's not billions and billions and billions of dollars out here coming from giant corporations that want to have their way with the American people is just ridiculous. This has pretty much been going on since, I don't know, for the last 30, 35 years, ever since I became unwillingly interested in politics, because I always hated politics. And I hate them more every day because they're so into our personal and private lives that since they are in our personal and private lives so heavily, then that has forced people to become awake and become aware, and has forced people like me that really never wanted to get involved. Now we got to get involved.
It had become the party of war, censorship, corruption, big pharma, big tech, big ag, and big money. When it abandoned democracy by canceling the primary to conceal the cognitive decline of the sitting president, I left the party to run as an independent. The mainstream of American politics and journalism derided my decision. Conventional wisdom said that it would be impossible even to get on the ballot as an independent because each state poses an insurmountable tangle of arbitrary rules for collecting signatures. I would need over 1 million signatures, something no presidential candidate in history had ever achieved. And then I'd need a team of attorneys and millions of dollars to handle all the legal challenges from the DNC.
And here's where the corporation's money comes in, because if these parties could not get corporate money, they would have to rely on the money, solely money from we the people. If we get rid of all the lobbying, if we get rid of all the corporate donations and, support and all this, they would have to rely on the American people to get the campaign funds. And I agree. Why can't we have anybody that's got a good idea get out here and get their ideas heard, and then the people can react? But when you have big tech and government involved in censorship, censoring anybody that doesn't toe their line, I mean, that's just it right there. That's election interference. And that, if nobody can hear your great ideas, your great American ideas, your constitutional ideas, if nobody can hear those, then you can talk all you want. But if nobody can hear it, the First Amendment that guarantees freedom of speech also guarantees the freedom to hear. See, speech is not a one-sided road. I can say all I want, but if nobody can hear me, then the speech doesn't matter, right?
The naysayers told us that we were climbing a glass version of Mount Impossible. So the first thing I want to tell you is that we proved them wrong. We did it because beneath the radar of mainstream media organs, we inspired a massive independent political movement. More than 100,000 volunteers sprang into action, hopeful that they could reverse our nation's decline. Many worked 10-hour days, sometimes in blizzards and blazing heat. They sacrificed family time, personal commitments, and sleep month after month, energized by a shared vision of a nation healed of its divisions. They set up tables at churches and farmers markets. They canvassed door to door. In Utah.
See, that's one of the problems when you got two parties that are not going by the Constitution, which holds the guardrails to how far we can go out beyond that Constitution. If you don't have that, then there's no guide rails. There's no, when you have the guardrails, right, you can't go to, you can get to the edge of the guardrail and that's it. And that leaves a lot less room for mayhem and divisiveness, because those guardrails are going to hold everybody in the road. You might be in the right lane or you might be in the left lane, but you can't go 40 lanes over into some communist crap, which divides the people. And this is one of the first ways you're going to know that the Constitution is not being adhered to, because anybody that has a communist platform that is outside the Constitution of the United States should be immediately barred from running a political campaign, because it is anti-American, it is anti-constitutional. This is not what our country is about.
And in New Hampshire, volunteers collected signatures in snowstorms, convincing each supporter to stop in the frigid cold, to take off their gloves, and to sign legibly. During a heat wave in Nevada, I met a tall, athletic volunteer who cheerfully told me that he had lost 25 pounds collecting signatures in 117-degree heat. To finance this effort, young Americans donated their lunch money, and senior citizens gave up part of their Social Security checks. Our 50-state organization collected those millions of signatures and more. No presidential campaign in American political history has ever done that. And so I want to thank all of those dedicated volunteers and congratulate the campaign staff who coordinated this enormous logistical feat. Your accomplishments were regarded as impossible. You carried me up that glass mountain. You pulled off a miracle. You achieved what all the pundits said could never be done. You have my deepest gratitude, and I'm never going to forget that. Not just for what you did for my campaign, but for the sacrifices you made because you love our country.
Amen. Amen. Even though some of his policies, I've heard this, Robert, for a while, heard a few of his speeches and seen him on some shows like Roseanne Barr and this, that, and the other. And I don't agree with everything he says, but, he's willing to put the ideas out there and let people, talk about and vote on the ideas. That's the part that's good, right? That's what we need. He's not trying to shove everything down people's throats.
You showed everyone that democracy is still possible here. It continues to survive in the press and in the idealistic human energies that still thrive beneath the canvas of neglect and of official and institutional corruption. Today, I'm here to tell you that I will not allow your efforts to go to waste. I'm here to tell you that I will leverage your tremendous accomplishments to serve the ideals that we share, the ideals of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, of health, all the ideals that motivated my campaign. I'm here today to describe the path forward that you opened with your commitment and with your hard labors. Now, in an honest system, I believe that I would have won the election. In a system the like kind that my father and my uncles thrived in, a system with open debates, with fair primaries, with regularly scheduled debates, with fair primaries, and with a truly independent media untainted by government propaganda and censorship. In a system of nonpartisan courts and election boards, everything would be different.
See, that's right. The reason why everything is not unbiased, the reason why everything is partisan, and the courts are biased now and everybody I talk to, is because they have unconstitutionally reached into our personal lives so far. You know, when the government comes up and tells you got to take a shot in your arm, that's pretty, you know, that's as close as you can get to being in someone's personal life. And now, if you're telling everybody they got to get these things, I mean, personally, I don't think that there would have been that much gripe about taking a shot in the arm. You know, if other Americans had to do this, I don't think it would have been that big of a deal if the shot would have been, you know, vetted properly, if it would have been, went through all the experimental phases and all this, and we could have seen the unbiased truth in the document saying that the vaccine works and it's safe and it's all these things. You know, it would have took years to do this, but it's very important. I think if these steps would have been followed, then we wouldn't have had everybody like me saying, no, I'm not going to take some experimental something in my arm. See, that's the whole thing right there.
After all, the polls consistently showed me beating each of the other candidates, both in favorability and also in head-to-head matchups. But I'm sorry to say that while democracy may still be alive at the grassroots, it has become little more than a slogan for our political institutions, for our media, and for our government, and most sadly at all for me, for the Democratic Party. In the name of saving democracy, the Democratic Party set itself to dismantling it, lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth. The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself.
Yep, and the American people and our constitutional system of elections and democracy here, which, you know, we're not a democratic country. We are a constitutional republic, but we got some democracy in the system so the people can vote and have a voice. And they have tried every way. You know, they've been censoring the American people and the anti-democrat people out here for, you know, probably 10, 12 years, maybe even before that. When Barack Obama first came along, there was a lot of censoring going on then, and they've just increased it. One of the tricks they got now is they'll say, well, we're not going to censor somebody, we're just going to use the big tech algorithms to put those people way, 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 way down at the bottom of the line so nobody can find those people and hear those voices. This is clearly a type of communistic election interference. It's sort of the same things that Saddam Hussein and all these other third world dictators would use to basically use the media and the tools available to big government and big corporations to push a narrative that everybody loves their candidate. But the only thing is that's the only candidate anybody can see, anybody can comment on, anybody can support. Everybody else is pushed way down to the bottom of the list. So, you know, it's basically the same as blacklisting or banning somebody. It's just technically not doing that. You're just putting them at the bottom of the list. Same outcome.
Each time that our volunteers turned in those towering boxes of signatures needed to get on the ballot, the DNC dragged us into court, state after state, attempting to erase their work and to subvert the will of the voters who had signed those petitions. It deployed DNC-aligned judges to throw me and other candidates off the ballot and to throw President Trump in jail. It ran a sham primary that was rigged to prevent any serious challenge to President Biden.
Yeah, totally rigged, just like they did Bernie Sanders.
And when a predictably bungled debate performance precipitated the palace coup against President Biden, the same shadowy DNC operatives appointed his successor, also without an election. They installed a candidate who was so unpopular with voters that she dropped out in 2020 without winning a single delegate. My uncle and my father both relished debate. They prided themselves on their capacity to go toe-to-toe with any opponent in the battle over ideas.
Guys, we haven't seen a real debate between Republicans and Democrats in over a decade or more. No, there's a debate is where people can ask questions and people can answer. It's not scripted questions and we let somebody talk for a minute or two and then we cut them off and then we go to the next guy. No, we used to have town hall meetings where candidates and politicos would go into a town hall and they might be there 6 hours discussing policy and topics and ideas and all these things, and they would go back and forth and we would hear the real pluses and the minuses of this, that, and the other. But that's been a long time ago, and it's sort of weird because we live in the most advanced communication age ever in our lifetimes, where we can have more communication, more debate, more conversation than ever before, but we got so much less of it. Why? Because the people in power are scared of those conversations, of those debates, of what it will reveal about them and their political platforms.
They would be astonished to learn of a Democratic Party presidential nominee who, like Vice President Harris, has not appeared in a single interview or an unscripted encounter with voters for 35 days. This is profoundly undemocratic. How are people to choose when they don't know whom they are choosing? And how can this look to the rest of the world? My father and my uncle were always conscious of America's image abroad because of our nation's role as the template for democracy, the role model for democratic processes, and the leader of the free world. Instead of showing us her substance and character, the DNC and its media organs engineered a surge of popularity for Vice President Harris based upon, well, nothing.
That's what third world dictators do. They engineer, they manufacture all this phony support and try to act like it's real. And then when they steal the election and people come up and say, well, Joe Biden didn't get 81 million votes, well, we just go look back at the manufactured consent, the engineered popularity and all this stuff. And then we say, well, the mainstream media said she was popular. The engineered polls said the people wanted her and this and that and the other. And so now there's no reason to have any investigation into election. That's what they're clearly doing right here. They're doing the same thing they did with Joe Biden in 2020, except last time they didn't do a lot of mainstream media engineering. Joe Biden was nowhere to be found. He was hiding in the basement, this, that, and the other. So there was no consensus to go look back and say, yeah, everybody loved Joe Biden, so there's no reason to doubt the outcome of the election if there was any fraud or interference or anything like that. But they stole it, and now this time they've realized that we need to manufacture some real mainstream media consent, that we need to make this person look as, like they're basically the star of stars out here, and everybody is googly-eyed and totally crazy over them. So when the election gets stolen, we can go back and look at this. See, last time they couldn't go back and look at these things because Joe Biden was missing. Really, that was one of the reasons why the people never believed Joe Biden got 81% or 81 million votes, is because there was no media, no nothing out here propping up Joe Biden's popularity. They just stole it. That's it. And now they realize their mistake in doing that. And so now they're going to try to cover all the bases this time, but it's all just fake, phony. This is how communism works here.
No policies, no interviews, no debates, only smoke and mirrors and balloons in a highly produced Chicago circus. There in Chicago, a string of Democratic speakers mentioned Donald Trump 147 times just on the first day. Oh, who needs a policy when you have Trump to hate? In contrast, at the RNC convention, President Biden was mentioned only twice in 4 days. I do interviews every day. Many of you have interviewed me. Anybody who asks gets to interview me. Some days I do as many as 10. President Trump, who actually was nominated and won an election, also does interviews daily. How did the Democratic Party choose a candidate that has never done an interview or debate during the entire election cycle? We know the answers. They did it by weaponizing the government agencies. They did it by abandoning democracy. They did it by suing the opposition and by disenfranchising American voters. What most alarms me isn't how the Democratic Party conducts its internal affairs or runs its candidates.
Basically, what he's saying is it's all rigged, and that's right. It is. If the people can't hear what the person stands for, why would you vote for that person? See, it's all phony, fake bullcrap. And if her policies, if her stance was so great, wouldn't it be a benefit to get her out here and let her talk about those things? But see, they're not that popular, and they're not great, and that's why they can't let her out here to talk about them. You know, it's like he said, if your ideas are so good and so great for this country and the American people agree, where are you? Where are the ideas? Where are the interviews? Why? You can tell a politician is a deep state person, a paid off hack, when they won't talk. They're scared to talk. See, because their talk runs people off. That's why they don't want to talk. And before, when Joe Biden was talking, it was running everybody off, and they realized that the American people didn't like it and they weren't going to get any votes. So then they started saying stuff like, well, you know what, we're going to need to pump some oil after all. You know what, we're going to not tax the tips, you know, little by little coming out, trying to sound patriotic. I mean, I've heard them say, God bless America more in the last week than I've heard them say in the last 4 years here. See, it's all to sound patriotic and to try to hook somebody into believing that they want what's best for America, but yet their real policies are the policies that they had before they realized they weren't going to get elected because nobody liked what they were doing. And they figured out nobody liked what they were doing, and that's why Joe Biden is now gone. And now it's like we got to, you know, come up with a whole new scheme here using basically the same plan, except they're not going to let her talk like they let Joe Biden talk, because when people heard Joe Biden talk, they ran away from the Communist Democrat Party, and that's what they will do if they hear Kamala's real communist vision for the country. So we can't let her say much. And so all that leaves is a bunch of, you know, word salad, gobbledygook, run around in a circle after your tail kind of bullcrap talk.
What alarms me is the resort to censorship and media control and the weaponization of the federal agencies. When a U.S. president colludes with or outright coerces media companies to censor political speech, it's an attack on our most sacred right of free expression, and that's the very right upon which all of our other constitutional rights rest.
Not to mention that it is totally unconstitutional, and when somebody violates your constitutional rights, that's called a crime.
President Biden mocked Vladimir Putin's 88% landslide in the Russian elections, observing that Putin and his party controlled the Russian press, and that Putin prevented serious opponents from appearing on the ballot. But here in America, the DNC also prevented opponents from appearing on the ballot, and our television networks exposed themselves as Democratic Party organs. Over the course of more than a year, in a campaign where my poll numbers reached at times in the high 20s, the DNC-aligned mainstream media networks maintain a near-perfect embargo on interviews with me. During his 10-month presidential campaign in 1992, Ross Perot gave 34 interviews on mainstream networks. In contrast, in the 16 months since I declared, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, and CNN combined gave only 2 live interviews from me. Those networks instead ran a continuous deluge of hit pieces with inaccurate, often vile, pejoratives and defamatory smears. Some of those same networks and colluded with the DNC to keep me off the debate stage. Representatives of those networks are in this room right now. And
you know, it seems like with today's high tech, and you know, you've heard over the decades here about how we need to have fairness in media. Remember how when everybody wanted to vote for the Republicans, and the Republicans had a vast majority of support, all the Democrats would come out and they would say, well, you know, we need to have equal airtime, right? And this went on for years. You know, if you show a Republican ad, then you got to show a Democrat ad, right? Well, with big tech, why can't they just have, you know, when they promote one party, you know, favor one party and have a ad that is positive toward that party, why can't they just have another ad right beside it promoting the opposite party? Wouldn't that be equal and fair and balanced? Let the people decide. That's, you know, keep your opinion out of it. We don't care about Google's opinion. We don't care about Microsoft's opinion. We don't care about ABC's opinion or MSNBC's or CNN's or Fox's or anybody else's opinion. We care about our opinion. That's all that matters. That's all that should matter.
I'll just take a moment to ask you to consider in many ways that your institutions have abdicated this really sacred responsibility, the duty of a free press to safeguard democracy and to challenge always the party in power. Instead of maintaining that posture of fear and skepticism toward authority, your institutions have made themselves government mouthpieces and stenographers for the organs of power. You didn't alone cause the devolution of American democracy, but you could have prevented it. The Democratic Party's censorship of social media was even more of a naked exercise of executive power. This week, a federal judge, Terry Doughty, upheld my injunction against President Biden, calling the White House's censorship project, quote, the most egregious violation of the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America.
No question about it.
Doughty's previous 155-page decision details how, just 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, President Biden and his White House opened up a portal and then invited the CIA, the FBI, CISA, which is a censorship agency, it's the center of the censorship industrial complex, DHS, the IRS, and other agencies to censor me and other political dissidents on social media. Even today, users who try to post my campaign videos to Facebook or YouTube get messages that this content violates community standards. 2 days after Judge Doughty rendered his decision this week, Facebook was still attaching warning labels to an online petition calling on ABC to include me in the upcoming debate. They said that violates community standards, their community standards. The mainstream media was once the guardian of the First Amendment and democratic principles, and it's joined this systemic attack on democracy. It also, the media justifies their censorship on the grounds of combating misinformation, but governments and oppressors don't censor lies. They don't fear lies. They fear the truth, and that's what they censor.
Amen. That's it. That's true. I wish he would just use the actual word that Americans need to hear, and that is that this is communistic, that this is fascistic, this has no room in a freedom and liberty based country here. This is total un-American in every single way.
And I don't want any of this to sound like a personal complaint, because it's not. For me, it's all part of a journey, and it's a journey that I signed up with. But I need to make these observations because I think they're critical for us doing the thing that we need to do as citizens of democracy to assess where we are in this country and what our democracy still looks like, and the assumptions about U.S. leadership around the globe. And are we really still a role model for democracy in this country?
All the people doing this, they're hooked in with China, they're hooked in with all these communist and fascist and dictatorship countries. They're all in it together. That's why it's so hard. That's why it's such a massive feat to get around these people. I mean, I don't even know, why hasn't the United States Supreme Court long ago came out and told Google and told Facebook and told everybody else that's censoring the American people that you got to stop now, you know? And there's plenty of ways to stop it. One of them is that you're all colluding under a RICO conspiracy here, and if you don't stop now, we just take your freaking company. We just take your resources, we take everything you have, and then maybe the next guy that's doing it will look and see, well, I better not do that behavior anymore if I want to keep my business here. See, it all comes down to law enforcement. There's no law enforcement, and that's why all this crap keeps going on.
Or have we made it, a kind of a joke? And here's the good news. While mainstream outlets denied me a critical platform, they didn't shut down my ideas, which have especially flourished among young voters and independent voters, thanks to the alternative media. Many months ago, I promised the American people that I would withdraw from the race if I became a spoiler. A spoiler is someone who will alter the outcome of the election but has no chance of winning. In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory in the face of this relentless, systematic censorship and media control.
See, it all starts with the censorship. That's just how it is. That's why we have the First Amendment, because everything starts with the word, the spoken word.
I cannot in good conscience ask my staff and volunteers to keep working their long hours or ask my donors to keep giving when I cannot honestly tell them that I have a real path to the White House. Furthermore, our polling consistently showed that by staying on the ballot in the battleground states, I would likely hand the election over to the Democrats with whom I disagree on the most existential issues: censorship, war, and chronic disease. Oh, I want everyone to know that I am not terminating my campaign. I am simply suspending it and not ending it. My name, my name will remain on the ballot in most states. If you live in a blue state, you can vote for me without harming or helping President Trump or Vice President Harris. In red states, the same will apply. I encourage you to vote for me. And if enough of you do vote for me, and neither of the major party candidates win 270 votes, which is quite possible. In fact, today our polling shows them tying at 269 to 269.
All right, well, see, here's one thing I don't like when politicians come up here and they complain about the biased media, the mainstream media, the rig this and rig that, and then they get up here and they cite these polls, I guess, unless, you know, you have some independent company that's independent from all these places doing your own polls, then I would not believe the polls, because they're probably rigged just like the mainstream media and everything else is. So that's one thing I don't like about when people complain about the mainstream media and all this stuff, and then they get up there and sometimes use the mainstream media as a legitimate resource. Now, we know that mainstream media has to put a little bit of truth out there, you know, or they would be complete liars and nobody would watch them at all. And it's easier to get somebody to believe a lie if it's mixed in with a little bit of the truth. But I don't know, I just think I don't like it when you totally distrust an organization or a group of people or whatever, and then you get up here and you use something they come up with. I don't buy that.
And I could conceivably still end up in the White House in a contingent election. But in about 10 battleground states where my presence would be a spoiler, I'm going to remove my name. And I've already started that process and urge voters not to vote for me. It's with a sense of victory and not defeat that I'm suspending my campaign act.
I mean, see, this is the thing here. All right, we got election meddling by big tech, by the government, and everybody else. That people can't just come out and be a candidate and just say what they want, say what they believe in, you know, talk about policies and debate things. And that's why you have this right here. So, you know, when he comes up and says, well, in certain states you can still vote for me, other ones you might not be able to, you know, I'm removing my name out of states that can hurt Trump and this, that, and the other. See, this is sort of like a little bit more election meddling, but when the government and these people in power begin the elections with the election meddling, now it forces people who are otherwise honest, want to be legitimate, now that forces them into some kind of defensive election meddling. See, I mean, I'm not saying that I disagree with this, I'm not saying I agree with it, it's just if we had a real fair, honest election where without the censorship, then this would not be going on right here. See? And so when you got somebody that's crooked running everything, then the honest people are going to have to sometimes be crooked in order to get a fair shot.
Not only did we do the impossible by collecting 1 million signatures, we changed the national political conversation forever. Chronic disease, free speech, government corruption, breaking our addiction to war have moved to the center of politics. I can say to all who have worked so hard the last year and a half, thank you for a job well done.
Now, here's another thing is, okay, all these wars that we've been involved in, except for when Trump was in, all these wars contributed to the de-dollarization of our currency because people didn't like us, right? You know, they say that, oh, we're so respected in the world. No, our respect in the world has gone down under the last two Democratic administrations, under Obama and under Biden. And part of it's because of these wars. And that is leading to BRICS and all these other countries that are saying we're not going to use the dollar to buy oil, this, that, and the other, right? So when you think about Trump, you hear him say the number one thing is we're going to drill. We're going to get oil. We're going to get the prices down. We're going to make, you know, produce so much oil, and we're going to have to sell a lot of that oil. And how are we going to sell a lot of that oil? We're going to sell a lot of that oil around the world. And that means we're going to have a lot of American dollars to buy the oil. So this is a way to combat the de-dollarization of the world here. When you put out all this oil, and you know, we got so much that we can sell it cheaper, and everybody wants cheaper oil, and in order to buy the cheaper oil, now you're going to have to use the dollar again. See, that's where this is going.
Three great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. And now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, the war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military-industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification, like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, from invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the U.S. neocons for American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response.
So let's talk about the other possibilities that Russia could have took, and I'm sure that they did try to take. And what one of the possibilities that could have happened is, and I'm sure Russia tried to make a deal with Ukraine. They've been wanting to put the pipelines through Ukraine and this, that, and the other. And now since NATO has, you know, way before now been trying to put, you know, a shield of defense there at Ukraine to get Russia to crawl back in its hole, Russia, I'm sure, came out and told Ukraine that, look, we want to get these pipelines through, and you can have riches, because these pipelines are going to create untold billions of dollars, and we will be more than happy to give Ukraine a percentage of these riches, so the Ukrainian people could have been very well off, had a lot of money, a lot of new infrastructure, a lot of security, everything. They could have had prosperity beyond their imaginations because of these pipelines. And then on the next hand, they could have also had security beyond their wildest dreams, because that would have been basically the beachhead into Russia. And with the pipelines going out and NATO coming in trying to strong arm Russia into these you know, situations, then Ukraine would have been a beachhead, and any force would have had to go through Ukraine first. So Russia would have massively beefed up the security for Ukraine. So they could have had massive security. They could have had massive prosperity if they would have worked out a deal with Russia. You know, Putin never said, I want to go into Ukraine and make everybody a slave and a serf. He never said that. He just wanted to go in and fortify his country and sell more oil and gas. So the big question of the day is, why didn't Ukraine take them up on this offer of massive security and prosperity? It just doesn't make sense.
To the reckless neocon project of extending NATO to encircle Russia, a hostile act. The credulous media rarely explain to Americans that we unilaterally walked away from 2 intermediate nuclear weapons treaties with Russia, and then put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. This is a hostile act. And that the Biden White House repeatedly spurned Russia's offer to settle this war peacefully. The Ukraine war began in 2014 when U.S. agencies overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed a hand-picked pro-Western government that launched a deadly civil war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. In 2019, America walked away from a peace treaty, the Minsk Agreement, that had been negotiated between Russia and Ukraine by European nations. And then in April of 2022, we wanted the war. In April of 2022, President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to force President Zelensky to tear up a peace agreement that he and the Russians had already signed, and the Russians were withdrawing troops from Kiev and Donbass and Lugansk. And that peace agreement would have brought peace to the region and would have allowed Donbass and Lugansk to remain part of Ukraine. President Biden stated that month that his objective in the war was regime change in Russia. His Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, simultaneously explained that America's purpose in the war was to exhaust the Russian army, to degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. These objectives, of course, have nothing to do with what they were telling Americans about protecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is a victim in this war, and it's a victim of the West. Since then, of Russia and both Russia and the West. Since then, we have, since tearing up that agreement, forcing Zelensky to tear up the agreement, we've squandered the flower of Ukrainian youth, as many as 600,000 Ukrainian kids, and over 100,000 Russian kids, all of whom we should be mourning.
And this administration wants to say they care about people. So we got hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians dying. We got 100,000 Russians dying. We got people dying from drugs, by the tens of thousands coming into our country. We got people dying from, murder and all these things coming across our border. We got people dying everywhere. We got out of control abortion situation, but these people claim to love life. It's just a lie.
Have died, and Ukraine's infrastructure is destroyed. The war has been a disaster for our country as well. We squandered nearly $200 billion already, and these are badly needed dollars in our communities, suffering communities all over our...
Well, actually, I think it's about $280 billion, and then because it's going to take 30 years to pay off the money because we had to borrow it, so it's actually going to be over $500 billion. Now, don't forget this. Every time we have a war, the politicians come up and they say, well, right after the war, they come up and say, well, what, that war cost us $1 or $2 trillion. And then 3 or 4 or 5 years later, after everything's done gone through and everything's been added up and all the this, that, and the other has finally been added on, now we hear that it's $5 trillion, just like with the Iraq war. And since it's borrowed money, that $5 trillion is probably more like $8 or $9, $10 trillion.
Country. The Nord Stream pipeline sabotage and the sanctions have destroyed Europe's industrial base, which form the bulwark of U.S. national security. A strong Germany with a strong industry is a much, much stronger deterrent to Russia, and a Germany that is deindustrialized and turned
Agreed, totally agreed.
into just an extension of a U.S. military base. We've pushed Russia into a disastrous alliance with China and Iran.
No doubt, no doubt. See, everything we do is anti-American. It's about killing our country. They keep saying this is for the good of the country. No, the drugs coming across the border is not good for the country. People getting raped and murdered by illegals that shouldn't be here is not good for our country. 500,000 Ukrainians dying is not good for our country. 100,000 Russians dying is not good for our country or humanity or mankind. This is all made up total bullcrap that they've been feeding us forever.
We're closer to the brink of nuclear exchange than at any time since 1962. And the neocons in the White House don't seem to care at all. Our moral authority and our economy are in shambles, and the war gave rise to the emergence of BRICS, which now threatens to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. This is a first-class calamity for our country.
It's a first-class assault on our country. That's what it is.
Judging by her bellicose, belligerent speech last night in Chicago, we can assume that President Harris will be an enthusiastic advocate for this and other neocon military adventures. And President Trump says that he will reopen negotiations with President Putin and end the war overnight as soon as he becomes president. This alone would justify my support for his campaign.
And as soon as that war, they're going to negotiate, and it's going to happen like what I said a minute ago. They're going to negotiate. Russia's going to get their pipelines and their security out there where they need it against NATO, unless Trump makes NATO back off, and they will be more prosperous.
Last summer, it looked like no candidate was willing to negotiate a quick end to the Ukraine war, to tackle chronic disease epidemic, to protect free speech, our constitutional freedoms, to clean corporate influence out of our government, or to defy the neocons and their agenda of endless military adventurism. But now one of the two candidates has adopted these issues as his own, to the point where he has asked to enlist me in his administration. I'm speaking, of course, of Donald Trump. Less than 2 hours after President Trump narrowly escaped assassination, Callie Means called me on my...
All right, I'm going to skip this part because it really don't have nothing to do with much.
Allow us to disagree publicly and privately and fiercely, if need be, on issues over which we differ. working together on the existential issues upon which we are in concordance.
And that's fair. That's how it's supposed to be. We can talk about things, and at the end of the day, we can disagree, but we're not going to hate each other. We're not going to censor you. We're not going to blacklist you. We're not going to take away your payment systems because we don't agree on something. Really, it's supposed to come down to whether the American people agree, on something or not. That, this is not a system where Americans are held hostage to the total beliefs of one person or another, but the beliefs have to be constitutional. They have to be America first. They have to be based in the security and protection and the prosperity of the American people, because that's why you have a country. You have a country with a constitution that puts the people that own the country and holds the constitution. It has to be to favor them, unbiased. In my opinion, if you don't like your home country, that's sort of like saying you don't like your mother. And clearly, I would think everybody is biased toward their mother, right? And that's how it should be.
I was a ferocious critic of many of the policies during his first administration, and there are still issues and approaches upon which we continue to have very serious differences. We are aligned with each other on other key issues like ending the forever wars, ending the childhood disease epidemic, securing the border, protecting freedom of speech, unraveling the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, getting the U.S. intelligence agencies out of the business of propagandizing and censoring and surveilling Americans.
Amen. Amen. There you go. Right there. Let's get that done. If we can get that done, we will be well on our way to a constitutional freedom and liberty based country here.
And interfering with our elections.
Yeah.
Following my first discussion with President Trump, I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me. Suspending my candidacy is a heart-rending decision for me, but I'm convinced that it's the best hope.
What kind of politician would shut down any communication or debate or conversation with a person, especially in their party, that has a lot of support? It just doesn't make sense.
Or ending the Ukraine war and ending the chronic disease epidemic that is eroding our nation's vitality from the inside, and for finally protecting free speech. I feel a moral obligation to use this opportunity to save millions of American children, above all things. In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Dr. Carlson's recent interview with Kelly Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent. Today, 2/3, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world.
And ever since the government has got involved with healthcare, ever since Hillary Clinton had that big deal when Bill Clinton was in office about how we need national health care, ever since then, government's got more involved in healthcare, and healthcare's got more expensive, and healthcare has got worse. And we need to clean this up. Now, I'm not going to play the whole rest of this part because it is mostly about the healthcare with a bunch of stats and everything, but I would advise everybody to go listen to this. Well, maybe I'll just keep it running for those that want to hear it. I'm not really going to comment anymore probably about this, but I agree that this healthcare issue is a huge, huge, huge part of getting America back on the right track.
79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during the COVID epidemic, we had the highest body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. And CDC says that's because we are the sickest people on earth. We have the highest chronic disease rate on earth. And the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So these were people who had immune system collapse.
And that's why these people got injured and hurt and dead by a flu that was a little bit harsher than regular flu, because they already had all these other problems going on, and that just mounted up. So when they got sick, it really put them over the top. Another thing is if you got 3 or 4 other medical issues and you're already taking drugs for those, then what that's going to do is numb the body, because remember, these medications do not cure anybody. They just mask the symptoms and make the body numb from the damage being done to the body. And so if you're taking 3 or 4 things to get the body numb from all these problems, then when you get a flu, you're probably not going to know you got a flu until the flu gets so bad that the medications that you're already taking for other things can't mask the damage anymore. And now you realize you got this bad flu, which is even, a lot worse, because you didn't catch it when it was just something smaller, and now it's too late. See, that's the problem with this.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, and no other country has anything like this. 2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues. 50 years ago, that number was less than 1%. So we've gone from 1% to 66%. In America, 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese, and 50% of our children. 120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. They were literally.
If you're interested in more on natural food stuff, all the propaganda that the food industry puts out, look up Dr. Wallach. He is the founder of Youngevity Incorporated, and they got a lot of useful things out there, vitamins, minerals, such and such. But I don't know if you can still find them on YouTube, but he does a lot of speeches about how the food industry just lies to everybody and makes everybody sick.
There were case reports done about them. Obesity was almost unknown. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3%, compared to 50% here. Half of Americans have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. When my uncle was president, I was a boy. Juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. A typical pediatrician would see 1 case of diabetes during his entire career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic, and the mitochondrial disorder that caused diabetes also causing Alzheimer's, which is now classified as diabetes, and it's costing this country more than our military budget every year. There's been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, Asperger's, autism. In the year 2000, the autism rate was 1 in 1,500. Now autism rates in kids are 1 in 36, according to CDC nationally. Nobody's talking about this. 1 in every 22 kids in California has autism. And this is a crisis that 77% of our kids are too disabled to serve in the United States military. What is happening to our country? And why isn't this in the headlines every single day? There's nobody else in the world that is experiencing this. This is only happening in America. About 18%, and by the way, there has been no change in diagnosis, which the industry sometimes like to say. There has been no change in screening. This is a change in incidence. In my generation, 70-year-old men, the autism rates are about 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, 1 in 34. I'll repeat, in California, 1 in 22. Why are we letting this happen? Why are we allowing this to happen to our children? These are the most precious assets that we have in this country. How can we let this happen to them? About 18% of American teens now have fatty liver disease. That's like 1 out of every 5. That disease, when I was a kid, only affected late-stage alcoholics who were elderly. Cancer rates are skyrocketing, and the young and the old. Young adult cancers are up 79%. 1 in 4 American women is on antidepressant medication. 40% of teens have a mental health diagnosis, and 15% of high schoolers are on Adderall, and 500,000 children on SSRIs. So what's causing this suffering? I'll name 2 culprits. The first and the worst is ultra-processed food. About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed. That means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils. Laboratory scientists who may have formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all the big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to figure out new chemicals to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. Humans aren't biologically adapted to eat them. Hundreds of these chemicals are now banned in Europe, but ubiquitous in American processed foods. The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, and our environment. Pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, and toxic waste permeate every cell of our bodies. The assault on our children's cells and hormones is unrelenting. To name just one problem, many of these chemicals increase estrogen. Because young children are ingesting so many of these hormone disruptors, America's puberty rate is now occurring at age 10 to 13, which is 6 years earlier than girls were reaching puberty in 1900. Our country has the earliest puberty rates of any continent on the earth. And no, this isn't because of better nutrition. This is not normal. Breast cancer is also estrogen driven, and it now strikes 1 in 8 women. We are mass poisoning all of our children and our adults. Considering the grievous human cause of this tragic epidemic of chronic disease, it seems almost crass to mention the damage it does to our economy. But I'll say, it is crippling the nation's finances. When my uncle was president, our country has spent $0 on chronic disease. Today, government healthcare spending is almost all for chronic disease. And it's double the military budget. And it is the fastest growing budget item in the federal budget. Chronic disease costs more to the economy as a whole, costs at least $4 trillion, 5 times our military budget. And that's a 20% drag on everything we do and everything we aspire to. Poor and minority communities suffer disproportionately. People who worry about DEI or about bigotry of any kind, this dwarfs anything. We are poisoning the poor. We are systematically poisoning minorities across this country. Industry lobbyists have made sure that most of the food stamp lunch program, about 70% of food stamps and 70 or 77% of school lunches are processed foods. There's no vegetables. There's nothing that you would want to eat. We are just poisoning the poor citizens, and that's why they have the highest chronic disease burden of anybody, any demographic in our country, and the highest in the world. The same food industry lobbied to make sure that nearly all agricultural subsidies go to commodity crops that are the feedstock of processed food industry. These policies are destroying small farms, and they're destroying our soils. We give about, I think, 8 times as much in subsidies to tobacco than we do to fruits and vegetables. It makes no sense. If we want a healthy country, the good news is that we can change all this. We can change it very, very quickly. America can get healthy again. To do that, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to root out the corruption in our health agencies. Second, we need to change incentives in our healthcare system. And third, we need to inspire Americans to get healthy again. 80% of NIH grants go to people who have conflicts of interest. These are the people, virtually everybody who sits in Joe Biden just appointed a new panel to NIH to decide the food recommendations. And they're all people who are from the industry. They're all people who are from the processed food companies. They're deciding what Americans, here is healthy, and the recommendations on the food pyramid, and what goes to our school lunch programs, what go to, the program, the Swiss program, the food stamp programs. They're all corrupted and conflicted individuals. These agencies, the FDA, USDA, and CDC, all of them are controlled by giant for-profit corporations. 75% of the FDA's funding doesn't come from taxpayer; it comes from pharma. And pharma executives and consultants and lobbyists cycle in and out of these agencies with President Trump's backing. I'm going to change that. We're going to staff these agencies with honest scientists and doctors who are free from industry funding. We're going to make sure the decisions of consumers, doctors, and patients are informed by unbiased science. A sick child is the best thing for the pharmaceutical industry. When American children or adults get sick with a chronic condition, they're put on medication for their entire life. Imagine what will happen when Medicare starts paying for Ozempic, which costs $1,500 a month, and it's being recommended for children as young as 6, all for a condition, obesity, that is completely preventable and barely even existed 100 years ago. Since 74% of Americans are obese, the cost, if all of them took their Ozempic prescription, is $3 trillion a year. This is a drug that is made by Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe. It's a Danish company, and the Danish government does not recommend it. It recommends change in diet to treat obesity and exercise. And in our country, the recommendation now is for Ozempic to children at age 6. Novo Nordisk, the biggest company in Europe, and virtually its entire value is based upon its projections of what it's going to sell, of the Ozempic it's going to sell to America. And we have the food lobbyists have a bill in front of Congress today that is backed by the White House, backed by Vice President Harris and President Biden, to allow this to happen. This $3 trillion clause that is going to bankrupt our country. For a fraction of that amount, we could buy organic food for every American family, 3 meals a day, and eliminate diabetes altogether. We're going to bring healthy food back to school lunches. We're going to stop subsidizing the worst foods with our agricultural subsidies. We're going to get toxic chemicals out of our food. We're going to reform the entire food system. And for that, we need new leadership in Washington. Because unfortunately, both the Democrats and the Republican parties are in cahoots with the big food producers.
Yeah, I agree. They're totally in cahoots with the big food company. They paid off big agri and paid to get farmers to quit farming. They paid farmers and livestock people to quit producing livestock. We'll give you $50,000 a head for each head you have, but you have to promise you will never, ever, ever raise cattle again.
Big Pharma and Big Ag, which are among the DNC's major donors. Vice President Harris has expressed no interest in addressing this issue. 4 more years of Democratic rule will complete the consolidation of corporate and neocon power.
She has no interest in anything except communism and running everybody's life.
And our children will be the ones who suffer most. I got involved with chronic disease 20 years ago, not because I chose to or wanted to.
The Communist Democrat Party is the party of, no, they don't like children. They hate children. And if there are children, they want to indoctrinate them with this transgenderism, all this stuff that hurts them, totally hurts them. They don't care about anyone. It should be pretty easy for the average person to see what they stand for.
It was essentially thrust upon me. It was an issue that should have been central to the environmental movement. I was a central leader at that time, but it was widely ignored by all the institutions, including the NGOs who should have been protecting our kids.
Yeah, but instead they just wanted to get big payoffs and do what the communists said, because that's the only reason the communists give the NGOs any money, so they can push and promote the communism.
Against toxins. It was an orphan issue, and I had a weakness for orphans. I watched generations of children get sicker and sicker. I had 11 siblings, and I had 7 kids myself. I was conscious of what was happening in their classrooms and to their friends, and I watched these sick kids, these damaged kids. In that generation, almost all of them are damaged. And nobody in power seemed to care or to even notice. For 19 years, I prayed every morning that God would put me in a position to end this calamity. The chronic disease crisis was one of the primary reasons for my running for president.
And this guy really believes in God. It's not just something to say, just to be saying it to try and, convince people that you sort of believe in God, like the Communist Democrats do. Alright guys, that's what I got for you. I'm going to end it right here. I hope you guys got something out of this. I think this is a great move for Americans in general and for our country, and we need to get back to all these issues he is talking about, and we need to squelch this communism and get it nipped in the bud right now. That's what I got for you, guys. I hope you guys have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll see you on the next one. God bless and take care of yourself.